Story 1. Elias had been driving the graveyard shift, Route 401, the night run, for 17 years, long enough for the scents of stale coffee, forgotten gum, and vinyl fatigue to be as familiar as his own breath. But tonight, there was a new note. A sharp, mineral chill, like standing too close to a river in deep winter. It was 1:17 a.m. The air brakes hissed, and the old NovaBus LFS, number 401, affectionately or derisively called the Panthom by the maintenance guys, settled against the curb at the city's edge. Elias checked the interior mirror. Empty. Just you and me, old girl, he muttered, rubbing his stubbled chin. Route 401 was a ghost run even on a normal night, carving a lonely path from the fading urban sprawl out into the logging towns that had died a slow death since the millennium. Tonight, the fog was a liquid wall, swallowing the road 10 feet ahead of his high beams. Elias pulled out onto the highway. The ride was rough. The 401 was due for the scrap yard. Every rattle, squeak, and shudder felt amplified in the heavy silence. He pressed the auxiliary heater button, but the air blowing from the vents was cold. Great, he sighed. At the junction of the old Northwood Trail, he instinctively slowed. This stop hadn't been active in decades. It was just a broken concrete slab next to a tilting, moss-covered shelter, a monument to a forgotten time. But tonight, the stoplight flickered. Elias frowned, checking the schedule printout tacked next to the dash. No pickup at Northwood, ever. He hesitated, his foot hovering over the accelerator. In all his years, he had never failed to stop for a potential passenger, no matter the absurdity. It was the driver's code, a remnant of a time when the route was about service, not schedules. He eased the bus to a stop. The door hissed open. A woman stood in the swirling mist. She was young, perhaps early 20s, dressed in a thick, wet wool coat and a long, dated floral dress. She looked profoundly, utterly lost, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks. She was holding a single, heavy leather satchel. "Good evening," Elias said, his voice rusty. She didn't speak. She simply stepped aboard, her movements unnaturally slow, almost dreamlike. Water, not quite rain, but thick, cold moisture, dripped from the hem of her coat onto the floor. She reached into her pocket. "Do you take cash?" Her voice was barely a whisper, flat and hollow, like sound echoing in a cave. "Token or pass is best, ma'am. But cash works." Elias pointed to the fare box. She dropped a handful of tarnished, unfamiliar coins into the slot. They sounded heavy, like lead on metal. The display flashed a generic error, but Elias, unnerved by her presence and the strange cold, waved her past. "Sit anywhere, ma'am." She walked to the third row on the driver's side, set her bag down with a heavy, dull thud, and stared straight ahead through the fog-streaked windscreen. Her eyes seemed fixed on something far beyond the reach of the headlights. Elias pulled back onto the road, his skin prickling. The bus was officially haunted now, but not by the diesel fumes or the ghost of the previous shift. This was something new, and it carried the cold. For the next half hour, the bus drove deeper into the dense pine woods. The woman in the wool coat remained perfectly still. The only sounds were the road noise and the unsettling metallic thump-thump of the transmission. Elias glanced at the interior mirror. He caught a flash of movement. Another passenger, a boy, perhaps 10 years old, was sitting 4 rows behind the woman. He wore a faded blue jacket and corduroy trousers, clothes that had been out of fashion for decades. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Elias slammed lightly on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road. "I didn't hear the door chime," he muttered. He checked the side doors and the rear door sensors on the panel. All green. The boy could not have gotten on. He turned fully in his seat, sweeping the interior with his eyes. The boy was gone. The woman in the wool coat hadn't moved. "Just fatigue, Elias," he told himself, running a hand over his face. The long, dark nights were finally getting to him. He was about to pull away when the bus door hissed open again. He hadn't touched the control. Standing on the first step, dripping water onto the entry mat, was a teenage girl with short, choppy hair and a cheap backpack. She looked soaked, her clothes clinging to her thin frame. Behind her, standing in the dense white of the fog, were two other shadowy shapes. Elias swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I haven't even been to a stop since Northwood. Where did you come from?" The girl's eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the dashboard lights like polished glass. She didn't speak. She just stepped up. And behind her, the other two shapes, boys, skinny and indistinct, climbed aboard. She pulled out a crumpled, waterlogged transfer slip. It had no date, no company name, just a faded purple stamp. This isn't valid," Elias stammered. The girl's lips curved into a faint, utterly joyless smile. "It's valid enough for this run." Elias felt a surge of icy terror. This run. He watched as the trio walked past the woman in the wool coat. The woman didn't acknowledge them, but the boy and girls sat down, forming a small, silent congregation of the damp and the cold. Every seat they occupied seemed to darken, the vinyl absorbing the moisture and the chill like blotting paper. Elias's hands were shaking as he hit the "close door" button. He glanced at the digital destination sign above the windscreen. It had been set for City Center Express. Now, it read, "Hell's Creek Gorge, Final Plunge." Panic seized him. He fumbled for his cell phone, his thumb slick with cold sweat. No signal. Of course. Route 401 was notorious for dead zones. He decided to stop the bus, turn it around, and head back toward the lights of civilization. He mashed the brake pedal. The bus ignored him. Instead of slowing, the engine note deepened, a grinding, angry roar that shook the floor panels. The bus began to accelerate, surging forward into the blinding fog. Elias fought the steering wheel, but it was stiff, resisting his desperate turns. The power steering was failing, or worse, overridden. He looked wildly into the interior mirror. There were 12 of them now. 12 figures, all soaking wet, all eerily still. Children, mostly. Teenagers. They looked like a school group, abandoned on a rainy field trip. The air temperature inside the cabin plummeted. Elias could see his own breath misting in the red glow of the instrument panel. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Where are you taking us?" Exclamation mark quote. A low, collective whispering started from the back seats. It wasn't loud, but it filled the cabin, a sound like leaves skittering across wet asphalt. It had no discernible words, just a constant, chilling susurrus. The woman in the wool coat finally moved. She turned her head slowly, her face pale, her expression one of profound accusation. "We're going home, driver," she whispered, the sound cutting through the ambient noise like a knife on ceramic. "Where you left us." Elias's blood ran cold. The Northwood school trip. 1987. A bus carrying a local high school geology class had somehow veered off a slick mountain road and plunged 70 feet into Hell's Creek Gorge. 12 fatalities. The only survivor was the driver, Harold Vance, who claimed brake failure but was later convicted of vehicular manslaughter due to mechanical neglect. Elias had read the reports. Every driver on Route 401 knew the story. The bus, the victims, the convicted driver who served 7 years and disappeared. He looked at the reflection of the woman in the mirror. She wasn't an original passenger. She was one of the 12. They hadn't gotten on the bus. The bus, the Panthom 401, had found them. Or, they had found it. Harold Vance is dead, Elias said, tears stinging his eyes from the cold. I'm Elias. I didn't drive you. The whispers intensified, sharp and hostile. Liar. 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 You're driving now, the woman stated, her eyes locking onto his. And you'll finish the job. Elias realized the true horror. The old bus, the 401, was the vessel of the accident, imbued with the malice of the driver who killed them and the despair of the students who perished. And tonight, the spirit of Harold Vance was using Elias's hands on the wheel. He could feel the pull, a ghostly, cold pressure on his muscles, guiding the wheel. The speedometer needle climbed past the red zone. The bus was hurtling down a long, winding incline. They were close to the gorge. Elias knew the bus. He knew the 401's flaws. He needed to break the physical connection. With a desperate cry, he wrenched the steering wheel to the right, aiming for the guardrail. The bus shuddered, fighting him, the engine screaming. He reached down to the floor, blindly searching for the emergency shutoff lever, a rusted metal switch near the transmission housing. He had never needed it. It was meant to kill the fuel pump and electrical system in case of an engine fire. His fingers scraped against the cold metal. The passengers in the back were screaming now, a collective, high-pitched, inhuman sound of fury and betrayal. The temperature dropped further, coating the windows in a thin layer of frost. No, you can't. The woman in the wool coat shrieked, her voice amplified and distorted, sounding like multiple voices speaking as one. Elias found the lever. He gripped it, pulled it up with all his remaining strength, and snapped it clean off the housing. The engine noise died instantly. The lights flickered and went dark. The power steering failed completely, and the entire bus plunged into a terrifying, inertia-driven slide. Elias felt the rear wheels leave the pavement. The bus was sideways, skidding through the fog, the screech of metal on asphalt deafening. He slammed his arm over his head as the world spun. There was a final, horrifying crunch of metal against rock, followed by an agonizing silence. Elias was still buckled in his seat. The driver's side of the bus was crumpled, the windscreen spider webbed, resting on a thick bank of mud and brush. He was 10 feet from the sheer, slick drop into Hell's Creek Gorge. He unclipped his seatbelt, his body aching, his ears ringing. The chill was gone. The smell of diesel was back, but the unsettling scent of wet earth and ancient cold had vanished. He slowly turned, surveying the interior. The seats were empty. The vinyl was dry. The destination sign was dark. There was no trace of the woman in the wool coat, the teenage girl, or the 10-year-old boy. No wet footsteps, no tarnished coins, no crumpled, phantom transfer slips. Just a quiet, demolished bus, resting at the edge of the abyss, smelling of fresh disaster instead of old regret. Elias climbed out of the wreck and collapsed onto the roadside gravel, breathing the cold, clean, foggy air. The Panthom 401 was truly dead, having completed its last, terrible run. He looked back at the wrecked bus, and for a terrifying second, he thought he saw the faded reflection of a face, not his own, in the shattered side mirror. A bitter, vengeful face, caught between life and death, finally frustrated. The screams were silent now. Only the fog and the relentless sound of the rushing creek below remained. Elias knew he would never drive another bus as long as he lived. He also knew he had finished the run that Harold Vance never could, and that perhaps, by destroying the vessel, he had finally given the victims of the Northwood tragedy their peace. But the cold was still in his bones, and he couldn't shake the feeling that 12 pairs of eyes were watching him from the depths of the pines, waiting for the next ride. Story 2. The newspaper clippings smelled faintly of mildew, cheap ink, and dust. They were yellowed, brittle, and stacked inside a shoebox marked simply, 401, in faded black marker. Detective Jenna Cross poured another cup of lukewarm coffee, the only thing keeping the chill from the precinct's archive basement out of her bones. It was 4 a.m., and she was alone, trying to make sense of the new case. Elias Thorne, bus driver, found wandering incoherent miles from the wreck of bus 401. The bus itself was a disaster, crumpled on the lip of Hell's Creek Gorge, exactly where the infamous Northwood school bus had plunged 36 years earlier. Thorne was claiming the bus had been driving itself, steered by ghosts. The guy's either drunk, high, or seeing things, her captain had stated before shoving the cold case file at her. Just write it up as reckless driving, mechanical failure, and close it. But Elias Thorne was clean. No priors, no drugs, not a drop of alcohol in his system. And the wreck of the new 401 bus was almost identical to the old one, right down to the twisted angle of the chassis. Jenna reached for the centerpiece of the shoebox, a laminated, front-page article dated October 1987. 12 students lost in Gorge tragedy. Driver charged. The accompanying black and white photograph showed a man with haunted eyes and a thin, receding hairline, Harold Vance. Harold Vance was the driver of the original bus, the one that carried the Northwood High Geology class. He was the sole survivor. He had been convicted of vehicular manslaughter, serving 7 years before disappearing into obscurity. Jenna traced his face in the photo. He looked less like a criminal and more like a man who had seen the bottom of the world. The most baffling element of the original case wasn't the crash itself, mountain roads, heavy rain, brake failure. It was the bizarre note Vance had left taped to the dashboard, found weeks after his initial conviction. She found a photocopy of the note, tucked between the police reports. I tried to stop it. I fought it. But they wanted to go home the way they left. The bus knew the path. They are waiting for the final run. The original detective, a man named Miller, had dismissed it as the ravings of a broken man trying to deflect blame onto a supernatural entity. Jenna didn't believe in ghosts, but she knew an obsessive fear when she saw one. If Harold Vance was still alive, he might hold the key to understanding why the current bus 401, driven by Elias Thorne, ended up at the exact same, cursed spot. Jenna spent the next 4 hours sifting through state records, finally pulling up a current address for a man named H. Vance, living in a mobile home park 90 miles inland, tucked away in the faded logging community of Port Willow. By 9 a.m., the fog had burned off, replaced by a cold, pale sunlight. Jenna was on the road, following Route 401 in reverse. Port Willow felt like a town perpetually holding its breath. The air was thick with the scent of pine sap and the silence of closed storefronts. Harold Vance's trailer was at the very edge of the park, backed up against a thick, encroaching forest line. It was immaculate, almost pathologically neat, but the paint was peeling, and the metal skirting was rusted through. He opened the door to her knock. He was older, thinner, his hair now sparse and white, but the eyes were exactly the same as in the photograph. Deep, dark wells of unfathomable sorrow and terror. "Detective Cross," he said, his voice quiet and dry, like old parchment. "I've been waiting for you." Jenna stepped inside. The trailer was spotless, decorated with nothing but a few ceramic mugs and a single framed print of a lighthouse. He offered her a seat on a vinyl sofa that was identical, she realized with a sickening jolt, to the seats on the old NovaBus. "It happened again," he stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation. "The Panthom got another one." Jenna pulled out the photo of Elias Thorne's wrecked bus. "Harold, I need you to tell me what you meant in your note. What is the Panthom? What is the final run?" Vance stared at the picture, not at the wreckage, but at the faint number, 401, barely visible on the side panel. He shuddered. That bus, it wasn't just a machine. It was built with parts from a condemned batch, a rush order. Bad brakes, bad wiring, bad steel. It was death waiting to happen, even without a body in it. But the kids made it angry. He began his confession, his voice never rising above a haunted whisper. "I was a good driver, detective. The best. I checked my rig every morning. That morning, I reported the brakes felt spongy. Maintenance said it was fine. Said I was seeing things. But the bus, it felt heavy that day. Cold. Like driving a refrigerator." Vance remembered the students clearly. Sarah, the witty one with red hair. Ben, the aspiring musician. Maria, quiet and studious. 12 lives, vibrant and full, compressed into a single, chilly vessel. When we hit the mountain road, it was raining, but the brakes failed before the curve. I know they did, but I couldn't control it. It was like someone else was pressing the accelerator. Someone who wanted to make sure we didn't slow down. He described the horrific moment the bus went over the edge. The sound of metal twisting, the roar of the river, the sudden, terrible stop. Then, the silence. I woke up in the wreckage. Everything was quiet. I was trapped by the dashboard. I could smell the water, the diesel. And I could hear them. He stopped. His eyes glazed over, staring at a wall that wasn't there. They weren't screaming in pain. They were whispering in confusion. "Where are we? Why is it cold? Why did the driver leave us?" They were trapped, not just by the metal, but by the water, the shock, the cold. And I couldn't reach them. Vance was rescued hours later, half drowned and in shock. But the voices, he claimed, never left. When they brought me to the hospital, I started talking about the bus's anger. The police, the doctors, they wrote it off as trauma-induced psychosis. But it wasn't the kids talking to me, not at first. It was the bus. The Panthom 401 itself. It whispered in my dreams. It told me I failed to finish the run. It told me I had to take them home. Jenna leaned forward, her notepad forgotten. What did it mean, take them home? To the place they were truly lost. Not the bottom of the gorge, but the journey to it. The moment of plunge. That's where they were stuck. The bus needed to relive that moment, over and over, until all 12 souls were ready to step off, believing they had completed the ride. He pointed a trembling finger at the photo of Elias Thorne's wrecked bus. They never got peace, detective. They are trapped in the bus's chassis, and when the original bus was scrapped, the essence, the cold, the whispers, they transferred. They find a new 401, a new driver, and they force the run. You're saying Elias Thorne was being controlled? Absolutely. He was the next vessel. But he fought it. He snapped the shut-off lever, Vance said, a sliver of pride mixed with deep horror in his voice. The only way to kill the run is to kill the machine. I wasn't strong enough. I just wrote the note and hid. Vance reached under the sofa cushion and pulled out a small, tarnished leather satchel, the kind the original article said the Northwood students used for field samples. It looked heavy. This belongs to the bus. It came out of the wreckage with me. It's never left my side. I think it's the fare. The toll. He opened the bag. Inside, resting on a bed of dried pine needles, were exactly 12 tarnished, unfamiliar coins, the exact description Elias Thorne had given of the fare the woman in the wool coat had paid. The fare for the final run, Vance whispered. They always pay the toll. Jenna's professionalism wavered. The logical part of her mind screamed coincidence. Shared delusion. But the 12 coins, the identical wrecks, the specific, impossible details. Quote. Where did you get these, Harold? They were in my pocket when I woke up. And I kept them. Now, you have them. He slid the satchel across the table. You have to destroy them, detective. The coins are the anchor. If they can't pay the fare, the bus can't complete the run. Jenna stared at the coins. They were cold to the touch, and held the same sharp, mineral chill Elias had sensed. What if I don't believe you? Vance looked at her, and his haunted eyes suddenly filled with a frightening, intense compassion. Then you'll wait for the next call, detective. You'll wait for the next driver of the Panthom 401 to be found, freezing and empty, at the edge of the gorge. And you'll know I told you the truth. As Jenna stood to leave, her hand on the cold doorknob, Vance added one last, chilling thought. One more thing, detective. The Panthom doesn't just pull the 12 souls trapped inside. It pulls in new ones, too. People who are lost, who are grieving, who are waiting for their own, final plunge. It takes the living to join the dead, forever sealing them to the seats. Jenna realized the true horror of Elias Thorne's story. The woman in the wool coat and the children he saw weren't just the ghosts of 1987. They were new victims, souls collected from the lonely stops of the night run, trapped alongside the originals, all waiting for the bus to finally take them home. She gripped the satchel, the 12 cold coins heavy in her hand, and stepped out into the bright, indifferent sunlight, knowing her investigation had just veered off the road and into a deep, chilling darkness. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.